evening. Thank you for joining us for this very important Alumni Insight conversation with Howard University President, Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, scholar, surgeon, triple alumnus of Howard, and of course, the 17th president of Howard University. I am Jennifer Thomas. I am a School of Communications alumna, now an associate professor and journalism sequence coordinator in the Department of Media, Journalism, and Film in the Kathy Hughes School of Communications here at Howard University. I'm actually teaching from the same department from which I graduated. I'm also a former Miss Howard and a career journalist, most recently as an executive producer with CNN. I'm really honored, I have to say, to serve as moderator. This is, I think, one of my third time asked to moderate an Alumni Insight conversation. Dr. Frederick, I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening as well. And thank all of you here who are watching with us and participating in this event. But before we begin, the journalist in me wants to make sure I say this for full transparency. Dr. Frederick and I have not talked at all before this event. This is unscripted, an unscripted conversation. We have not discussed any of the questions, nor was I given any guidelines on how this conversation should go. So he has not seen the questions and we have not spoken ahead of time. What we're planning to do for our conversation tonight, we're slated for 1 hour. I'd like to spend just about half of the time having a conversation, and then of course give ample time for questions from the alumni. And we know it's been a while since we've had an Alumni Insight with you, Dr. Frederick. So we have so much ground to cover. We'd like to talk about the Howard Forward Plan, of course, many of the successes that we've had at the university, but then we've also had an interesting year. You know, we've had a cybersecurity attack, of course, a student protest, issues and concerns about the Board of Trustees. But most importantly, what I'd like us to talk about to begin with is this pandemic, COVID-19. And I know there's the word I would say if I describe this year so far has been pivot. And if we look at the figures, I just went on Howard's website, which updates daily, as you know, the figures, and it said since August 17th of 2021, there have been 799 positive cases from students of COVID-19, 598 from faculty and staff, and that's a total of 1,397, which is just at a 1.93 total positivity rate. So I want to begin to ask you where we are, from your estimation, with the pandemic, especially with this Omicron variant that's surging here in Washington, and what the plans are at Howard.
Sure. First, let me start by thanking you, Dr. Thomas. It's the first time I've spoken to you for the new year, so Happy New Year to you and everybody else who's joining. Let me jump right in. You know, the pandemic, obviously, we're going to continue to have surges. The nature of this virus and the way the pandemic will continue to unfold, we will have variants as well, as especially as you vaccinate, and the virus is looking for more ways to adapt so that it can inhabit more hosts. For sake of clarification, the numbers that you just provided are the overall numbers for all the numbers. What's concerning is in the past couple of weeks, our infection rate is probably up to about 20% actually of the people who have been tested. And that's across all categories of faculty, students, and staff. So that is something that we're trying to look at fairly closely. As has been spoken about in the media, the infection rate and the virulence of this variant in particular is very different from the Delta variant. So this is a highly contagious virus. It is not providing a lot of symptoms. And, you know, we have to continue to take all precautions. Now there are recommendations as to upgrading the type of mask that one may use. And as we travel and engage, you know, hand washing, keeping our distance as best we can is also needed. And obviously having a highly vaccinated population and now we're requiring boosters as well, we think will provide for a safe environment that we can bring students and faculty back in person. Why in person? The studies have demonstrated clearly that for the development of our young people, that in-person interaction is a lot more helpful. And second, I think psychologically, over time, this is going to, ebb and flow. And what we have to do is to establish safety measures around, again, having a vaccinated population and observing all of the precautions necessary. And at the same time, trying our best to provide an education. So, and we have two very, I think in higher ed in particular, you have two very disparate populations. You have faculty and staff, of which a group of them may be significantly older and have significant comorbidities like myself. And then you have a younger group of people that, in spite of whether they're vaccinated or not, may still do well. And so we have to also recognize that we're in this together, and no one group should supersede the other in terms of health and safety, but combined, we have to do the things that are in the best interest of everyone involved.
I want to follow up a little bit about that. First, when we talk about the decision for this face-to-face instruction, and we know that the university, we've had ebbs and flows from last academic year where we were partially online and then being in person. And I have to say, it was very encouraging that we had such a low rate during the first semester. We didn't hear a lot of that in the media, but we had a low rate at the university. Can you just talk for those, many of our alumni who are joining, our parents, what the process is in terms of deciding how to go about making the decision on whether or not we'll be in person or online? I know I'm on one of the committees at the university with one of the associate provosts on classroom management. And, there's so much information and so many things that go into that. But on a broad level, can you just give our alumni an idea of what goes into these decisions?
Sure. As you know, we formed a task force of which you're on one of the subcommittees, and those subcommittees were broken down in a way to look at everything from classroom equipment, as you know, et cetera, and how we provide PPE, how we do testing, every aspect of it. And so we really got the community, and the committees are populated by faculty and staff and students like yourself, and we use that input and the data to make a decision. The reality, though, is that the only thing that's certain is the uncertainty of this. That's the only thing that we can guarantee, that whatever I say to you tonight, very quickly tomorrow, we can get news about a new variant in some other part of the world or some other state that could soon be here. And so we have to keep those things in mind. We also have to recognize that we run a healthcare system at the university as well. And therefore, not only are we using our expertise, but we get a chance to really see up close and personal what that looks like. The other unique thing about our situation is that we have our own testing site. So we test on campus. I know that people have been having difficulty around the United States getting tested, but I think you could attest to the fact that getting a test at Howard is probably one of the more simple things. Sometimes when you look at the news and you hear about testing difficulties, you probably don't quite grasp, or I don't think our community quite appreciates just how available we've made testing. I actually got tested yesterday. Again, as routine, I get tested every week. I'm still practicing in the hospital, et cetera. And so myself and the cabinet gets tested every week. I walked in, I was out today in about 3 minutes. And about 4 or 5 hours later, I had my PCR result. And about 15 to 60 minutes later, I had my rapid result as well. We don't use the rapid to determine what to do, but we've been using it to collect data to see how accurate it is, what the incidence of false positives are, et cetera. So we're using, national data, we're using the DC data, we're using our own data, and we're using the input and feedback we get from the committees as to how to proceed. So with that, as of today, we've decided that we will move forward with opening on the 18th. We had pushed back opening on the 10th, back to the 18th. And the reason for that was to just give the virus an opportunity to declare itself and hopefully get to a peak. What we've started to see nationally is that the incidence of infections with Omicron is beginning to flatten. Hospitalizations will lag that and will continue to go up, especially in the unvaccinated population. In our hospital right now, I believe we have about 79 or 80 patients who are testing positive. We're testing everybody who comes to the emergency room, regardless of what their complaint is, because of the incidence of the virus. And the patients that are in there are not requiring the same level of care as we had seen before. We're using less ventilator support for respiratory compromise, and we're using less ICU care overall as a result. So with that in mind, we have made a decision to bring students back to the residence halls this weekend and to start in-person instruction on Tuesday, recognizing the uncertainty that if we do see a rising infection rate, we will make a decision to, back away and potentially have to go online. So at the faculty town hall yesterday, the message from the provost and the rest of the team was to encourage everyone to be patient and flexible, and to also prepare their classes in such a way that if we do have to make a change, we could do that with as little disruption as possible.
Now, one more question on this topic for now. So there are many people who have reason for concern. You mentioned that we have many faculty members who are of a certain age. We have those who are caregivers, such as myself. My 90-year-old mother is watching downstairs. Hi, Mom. But we have a lot of people who have reason for concern. I know personally for you, Dr. Frederick, you have both sickle cell and are type 1 diabetic. So and you're still a practicing surgeon and physician. What advice, or how can you reassure those who are dealing with this COVID anxiety that's very real, to let us know that, to continue on through this?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things. First, the practical aspect of it. Anyone with concerns that requires some type of accommodation, my recommendation is that they go through our process to get an exemption. And we're fielding those. The volumes requesting that are not very large, and think especially in light of our experience in the fall. But I do encourage anyone that has that. And you're right, I fall in that category. I have sickle cell. I'm homozygous for that disease. And I also am a type 1 diabetic. So I fit firmly in that category. I'm vaccinated and have gotten a booster. But the anxiety is there. My wife contracted COVID right before Christmas this year, and had to be isolated in the house. And, I was with the two kids trying to avoid getting it myself. And I have a 15-year-old daughter who has asthma. So the anxiety goes all the way around. I'm on her school board as well, and making decisions at her school. She expressed to me as well her anxiety and the fact that she didn't want to go to school if there was a problem. Their infection rate is 1.8% at her school. And so that was reassuring when I saw that data yesterday, and I was able to have a conversation with her last night. So I think we have to follow the science around it. I think we have to also try to be rational about what exactly we're concerned about. Before we came back in the fall, I think lots of faculty and staff were concerned about student behavior. Students are social. Would they hang out, want to party? And the reality is that the students have really done a good job of really sticking to all of the guidelines that we've asked them to do, whether it's wearing masks, et cetera, maintaining some type of social distance, and for the most part, not really gathering at large events in an irresponsible way. Yes, will there be things that will happen from time to time? I think there will be. There's no doubt about that. And I think that that's something that we're going to have to continue to manage and keep an eye on, et cetera. And we certainly will do that. But I feel pretty comfortable right now that it is in an appropriate place, and that we have all the systems on board. I also encourage people as well to, what we have to do is to continue the dialogue as well, because things are changing. So when something new comes up that we have to look at, so for instance, this conversation about what type of mask we wear, and also there has to be a conversation about testing. We have a highly vaccinated population, and so we have to ask ourselves about the question of testing, especially asymptomatic folks. In the fall, we had faculty, staff, and students being tested every week. And my plan prior to Omicron surge was to take that down to only testing unvaccinated folks every week, as well as those who may have symptoms. And now with Omicron, I think we have to go back and reassess, who do we test and how often? And do we test only people who have been exposed to a known contact and who have symptoms, especially if you're vaccinated and boosted? And so we're evaluating that, and we're looking at CDC guidelines and also our own experience in order to make that determination as well. So I would encourage anyone with that anxiety, which I think is real, understandable, to make sure that they continue speaking and trying to get information. And certainly we have tried to set up opportunities for people to do that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Let's talk now about the most recent, the student protest that ended before the end of the semester. The longest protest in university history. As we all know, Howard is home to protests, one of the most famous from 1968 that was featured in Eyes on the Prize. We had others throughout several of the decades, but this was the longest. It did end. The information was sealed. The details were sealed by both sides. There were complaints that came in from students and alum who wanted to know about that. But in the end, we were told that there was an agreement in terms of moving forward with the university and with some of the demands that the students had met. Can you just share with our alumni, many of whom are parents as well, what the situation is now and where things stand with regards to the complaints about the dorms and the situation in some of the dormitories?
Yeah, the complaints about the dorms surrounded, I would say, primarily two things. One was, I would say, incidents of mold in dorm rooms, of which we end up having about 42 rooms out of an inventory of well over 2,500 rooms that were involved. And I would say the second aspect of it was our responsiveness to that. And clearly we have contracted out certain dorms to, we have contracts with certain outside vendors. And so we've engaged those vendors around that and making sure that quality of that responsiveness is there. The incidents, like I said, I think, and I still maintain, was blown out of proportion. And I think that's one of the reasons why it lasted that long. Every time a public official came on campus to inquire about the residence halls, I invited them to, go visit the residence halls and see the quality. And I mention that because I think we made a concerted effort over the past 5 years to renovate the residence halls. 90% of those rooms are 5 years or younger as a result, and were in very good condition. That doesn't mean to say that maintaining them at a certain level has to be done. I still think that has been the case as well. But I think for residence halls that weren't lived in actively for well over a year, and you saw this throughout the hotel industry, in many other universities as well, that there was and will be the incidence of mold, et cetera, and something that has to be abated. We did have a couple of pipe bursts, maintenance issues as well that you'll see in different areas. And we did have a sprinkler discharged by a student accidentally, which affected some 56 rooms, which we're still remediating as we speak. So all in all, the issue is for us to be absolutely responsive. We want to provide the highest quality residence hall experience, and that's why we went about the renovations that we did. We have to make sure that the maintenance is of the highest quality as well, and so we've put things in place to ensure that that's the case. And not just the maintenance, but the responsiveness around that and the customer service that's provided in responding to any issues that may have occurred. And I feel comfortable that we've taken the appropriate measures to maintain that going forward. I think you went on mute, Dr. Thomas.
I'm so sorry about that.
No problem.
Now, you mentioned that some of the information surrounding the protest was blown out of proportion. And, one of my areas of research is discussing misinformation and disinformation. And I do think that there was a lot of misinformation, or there has been, on a number of things with Howard in the headlines. But in terms of the student protest, there were complaints that the university was not transparent enough. There was a lot of conversation about just the state of the dorms in general. And as you mentioned, with the 90% of the rooms and a lot of the upgrades that have been done to the quad, for example, and with new dorms. But there are still students who say there are not enough rooms for students at Howard. Is that factual? And can you speak to that question and that issue that we've heard a lot during this protest?
Yeah, so I think just to make sure that we paint the entire picture and we're very clear here. We have 12,000 students. We do not have 12,000 beds. So is it factual that we don't have an inventory of beds that matches the student population? Absolutely correct. So the question then becomes, what is the appropriate level of beds that we should provide for the entire population, especially considering that we have undergrad and graduate students as well? We've looked at the industry standards. Roughly 40% of the population, I would say, is what a lot of people would say people are aiming for. We have about 5,200 plus beds in the inventory right now. And I would say that that's at an adequate setting. The conundrum here is that when we also look at the student profile for our students, the number of Pell Grant students that we continue to take in as a private institution is also unusual and outside of the norm. So we have 40-something% of our undergraduate students are Pell Grant eligible. And that means that the affordability in a city like DC is a significant issue. Now, if we push our inventory up, we also have to make sure that people are going to occupy those beds, because you don't want to have a high unoccupied rate. When I started as president, the occupancy rate was in the mid 80s. It's now at 99 to 100%. And so the issue is that we have to grow the inventory to match where we are. Both things can't happen overnight. So when we had low occupancy rate, it didn't make sense for us to be adding more beds. And as the population has increased, we have to look at the long-term prospect of adding that inventory. And also trying to make sure that that inventory is changing as well. Because in the grad and professional arena, you have students with families, kids, and obviously our most of our residence halls are not going to accommodate. So we do have plans to add that, but I have to say that there's always going to be a risk, especially right now. Enrollment around the country is down about 8.3% over the past 2 years in terms of not our enrollment, but enrollment in higher ed. And as the economy gets better, less people choose higher education as an option. Over the course of the pandemic, there's a report out just this week that shows that we've lost about 1 million students during the pandemic across higher ed. If that trend continues, we have to be cautious that while we are seeing significant increases in enrollment, that doesn't reverse itself and we end up with an inventory that we can't fill. So I think it's a matter of balancing the two. And given the fact that a significant number of our students are Pell Grant eligible, it is something that we have to make an effort, to address and to make sure we're addressing it adequately as well.
Okay. Well, all these topics we can spend the entire hour on, but we do have a lot of other things that I know alumni are interested in hearing your opinion about. So let's talk about one of the other somewhat controversial things of late. Just on the heels of the student protest, word came out about a lawsuit from alumni with regards to the Board of Trustees. And, I say that we hear the value of our degrees depends on success of the university. And the Board of Trustees, of course, is responsible for controlling and directing the affairs, property and interests of the university. That's what our website says. And in June, the board unanimously voted to update its board by phasing out trustee roles for students, faculty, and alumni over the next year. I'd like, if you can, just kind of give us there's a lot I know into this, but as I would say, the 5 W's and H, the who, what, when, where, and why, and how, because then of course we have the lawsuit. from 10 alumni saying that the board did not follow its own guidelines and is accusing the university, the board of improperly or even illegally excluding students, alumni, and faculty from its board of trustees. So can you speak to that? And first, I think maybe it's important to make clear, I think some alumni think that you unilaterally made that decision, and we know that's not the case. But can you just kind of explain what the reason was behind this?
Yeah, so the Board of Trustees is made up of a myriad of individuals who have their own governance process. I participate on the board. The board has executive sessions as well where I can be excluded from the executive session. So my participation even on the board is done in a way that the board still has full control. So you're right in your last point that this decision has nothing to do with me making the decision. I have participated in the conversations about it and also participated in the overall governance of the university as any president would. In terms of the what, why, where, if you look across higher ed, in terms of what the standards are around board governance, we are in the minority, or were in the minority in terms of where we were. The issue of alumni participation, I think, is critical. And over 62% of the current board members are actually alum of the university, which is a very high number, even for universities that actually set a number of a threshold. It's unusual at a private institution to have above 62%. And I'm very supportive of the fact that we continue to do that. We've just added 2 more board members, both of whom happen to be alum as well. And the reason for wanting and having a diverse group of individuals, especially including individuals who don't attend the university, is so that you get a wide variety of ideas and experiences about the governance of the university and the direction in which that should go. The university used a consultant to, as I said, the Board of Trustees used a consultant to evaluate where that was. I participated in the process as the president in terms of being interviewed, and then they generated a report that was presented to the board, starting with the governance committee, and then the governance committee, based on that report, made a recommendation to the full board. That includes making sure that there are efforts in place and standards set up to engage and get feedback and input from the different constituency groups that you mentioned. And I think that that's something that's also critical. During the pandemic, or at the beginning of the pandemic, when this first came up around having elections, et cetera, we did not know where things were heading. And the governance committee made a decision not to add anybody to the board, no general trustees, et cetera, which was the first decision they made. During that discussion, I did make a suggestion that we could have students and faculty participate in select committees in the interim in order to give us feedback and input. And so we did institute that. We did invite the faculty senate chair to the academic excellence committee meetings. And we did invite the student, the HUSA president to attend meetings as well. This year, we've expanded that engagement. So we now have a representative from the graduate student body as well, who participates with the student life committee. And we have invited the faculty senate chair, and he has declined. And I think he's been pretty explicit about his reasons for declining. We also have involved the Alumni Association president in the Development and Alumni Relations Committee as well. And so I think it's a healthy debate to have. I can't comment on specifics since there is a lawsuit, and I think we have to see how that plays out. The Board of Trustees feels comfortable with the decision that they made, and they will represent themselves appropriately in terms of the lawsuit.
Do you think that one of the complaints from many of the alumni is that they weren't informed from the consultant report that came forward, and that it seemed to be a lack of transparency from the board to the alumni community? In retrospect, is that something you think should have been handled differently, or do you think that some of those complaints are not necessarily warranted.
Yeah, I don't agree that it wasn't handled appropriately. I think it was handled in the way that anybody involved in the governance of a private institution would. I think it's very difficult to get people to participate in the governance of an institution that's private in a very public fashion. And I do describe Howard University as the most public private institution, but we have to be cautious, I think, when we start doing that in terms of how people also view doing business with the university and engaging with the university as well. And I don't think that there's an issue about transparency as well. This alumni insight call is an example of the number of these that have occurred under my presidency. I give a State of the University address to the faculty senate every fall and spring by their bylaws, as have my predecessors. We do a State of the University address at graduation, primarily kind of focused on alum. And the insight calls are not only done by myself, they're done by other members of the team. So I think the outflow of information that we provide is significant. And so I challenge that. We put out a bias newsletter. I think there's in terms of communications and communicating what we're doing, as well as answering to the questions as well around the decision-making process. I do think there has been a significant effort to do that. There's no need for any lack of transparency. I do think negotiating major things at the university in the public domain is probably not in the university's best interest. As you were speaking about misinformation and disinformation, I often say that we as a collective group often hurt ourselves the most because there are predators who are willing to pounce on what we do. And at the minute that they see us with infighting, they take advantage of that. Several public officials, like I said, came to this campus complaining about, the VP of the United States. And I said to them, I don't see what the VP of the United States has to do with a student protest. And to politicize that, I find to be misguided. And then when I offer you to go see the dorms yourself, all of a sudden you have a vote in Congress at 9:30 at night. I have to admit, that makes me a bit apprehensive and a bit suspicious. And why are we one of the most public private universities? We're one of only two non-military institutions in the federal appropriation budget and receiving $250 million a year. So there are lots of stakeholders that we also have to recognize that when we think we're having a family squabble, we actually are not. There are lots of other stakeholders who are taking their pieces and their direction from it to further their own agenda. And especially in a time when enrollment is down around the country and we are promoting enrollment of a diverse population, I think it does warrant us being careful. So all in all, it's a difficult decision to make. I think you have to make tough decisions. I think those need to be questioned. And I think the alum have called that to question, and the board has to respond to that question.
I want to ask one very quick follow-up about these former affiliate board members who have been invited to take place on several of the committees, as you mentioned. Can you just explain, because I think it's important for us as alumni to know the role of the committees in terms of their role to the board and to the decisions that are made on behalf of the university?
Yes, that's a good question. Let me use academic excellence as an example. So at academic excellence, a dean may come and present a new program that he or she wants to start, or a reason to close a program. Having the chair of the faculty senate there to weigh in on what that means, etc., being able to participate in the voting process as well is important. And once that person does that, or once that committee does that, they will then take it back to the full board for ratification, and the entire board would then vote on it one way or the other. So that participation is important. One, for data points, and information, but two, also, I think in the structure that's set up right now for the purposes of voting. And I think that that's important. Diversifying who is there, at some point, you're going to get to a point where you either have too many people or you're not able to get the work done. So one question is, can one person really come to a meeting and represent an entire constituency? The other issue is the board is the fiduciary agent of the university. And so the other thing that we have to remember is that anybody that comes to that board meeting and is presenting, really, while they are coming from a constituency, and that is to frame their discussion, but not necessarily to represent that constituency almost as a union member. So I'll use myself as an example. I've been in discussions about athletics on more than one occasion. And when you look at athletics and you look at Title IX and the number of male and female athletes we have, one of the discussions that we've had to have is which sports we should have. I've been the manager of the soccer team. I have sat in that board meeting and suggested that we need to evaluate whether we should keep soccer, right? Some along would hear me say that and say that's heresy, right? How could you, of all people, suggest that, right? Or if somebody else came and said, let's say we were looking at something else in academic excellence and we decided, listen, we cannot keep the hospital or have a department of surgery, then I have the responsibility, even as that being my primary appointment, to say if this is in the best interest of the university, we cannot have a surgery department, which would then mean that I would have to go find another job and look elsewhere and practice surgery elsewhere. And so that's what I would have to do. But I would have to come there with only one thing in mind, and that is what is best for Howard. When I made the decision to go to the board to bring back the College of Fine Arts, again, that was my idea in terms of looking at all of the scope of the offerings we had, and I went to the board. So I think sometimes we look at we look at decisions in isolation and we don't look at the totality of what needs to happen there. And I think when we think about representation, we have to think, and that's why having 62.5% or 62% of the board being made up of alum, I think is an important statistic. What I think we should look at even more closely is who those alum are. Are they from various industries and various fields? Are they from various schools across the university? And if so, do we feel comfortable that they are in a position to represent different ideas, but not necessarily represent for the sake of preservation or self-interest of one particular group, but rather, again, to give input for the one thing that should matter in the boardroom, and that is Howard University.
Okay, thank you. So we have about 20 minutes, and I know we have a lot of questions from alumni, but I do want to talk now in terms of moving forward about Howard Forward Plan, and talk about we have a lot of very positive things that are happening at the university level that alumni may not be aware of. Something that we as faculty are happy and appreciative about are faculty raises that we will be seeing in this month in January. But I wanted you to speak, if you can, about some of the things that are going on in terms of the Howard Forward Plan with our endowment. And then that'll lead us to some other questions about alumni giving, et cetera, that I have for you.
Okay, sure. So, the Howard Forward Plan, with strategic plans, those are dynamic documents. So I always want to make sure that we don't get ourselves locked into the static nature of what the pillars say and what the goals are, et cetera. Having said that, the pillars, if you look across all 5 pillars, we've been doing very well in terms of meeting the objectives and the goals. And so when you look at enhancing academic excellence, our 4-year graduation rate some 7 years ago was about 38%, is now up to 62%. Still nowhere close to where I'd like to see it. Obviously, you want to see it 80 and 90%, but when you look across higher education, that same 4-year graduation rate for African American students is probably in the low 20s. So we are doing almost 3 times better than all comers. So, again, we're going to set our bar high and pursue that aggressively. We looked at our offerings, and I would say the increasing desire for students to come to Howard. And so we looked at enrollment through that lens and looked at our full package of resources. And we felt that probably getting up to about 10,500 students was a good goal for 2024. As I mentioned earlier, we're up to 12,000 students. That means that we're going to become more selective as we try to tighten the number of students. But it also says that we have to look at that issue through a different lens. There's an increasing desire to attend Howard. We've had a crisis in this country that I've spoken about several times about the number of Black medical students and the fact that in 1978, we had more African-American males apply to and enroll in US medical schools than we did in 2015. Well, I'm happy to tell you that this year, that in the number of Black medical students went up by 21% this year. Unbelievable. But now we have to ask ourselves, is it sustainable? Now, almost all of those medical students who are Black in this country apply to Howard, but we also get almost 9,000 applications and we only admit 126. So we have to ask ourselves a question again, should we be doubling our medical school class? And so we have to start getting a bit granular around those things. Looking at our finances, it's very important that we maintain some type of, operating margin. And when we look at the operating margin in the past, we've been in a deficit. And for the past 5 years, we've had a positive bottom line. But that has included some one-offs and some one-time events that occurred. This year, our unaudited financials, which would be finished, we should have our audited financial statements by the end of January. But in the last academic year, our bottom line was a positive 185 million. And we expanded our revenue base to about just over $900 million. Again, very exciting outcomes when you look at where we've been. I took over a university that the hospital alone was losing 60 million. A hospital now that has been in the black over the past 4 years. And so that's something that we want to sustain. But the question is, can we continue to sustain those financial outcomes over time? Because those things bode well for the overall health of the university going forward. If we go out in the public markets to float bonds, it affects the interest rate at which we can do that if our financial house is in order. And I know sometimes people feel that when we talk about finances of the university, we're corporatizing the university. The reality is that it is a business, and that when it's not healthy financially, I think the alumni base is appropriately critical of the university, and I hope that as we get better financially, the alumni base will also be appreciative that we can now reinvest in the infrastructure, et cetera. And that has been the plan. We did dive into the residence halls initially because we felt those were a problem. The next part of the strategy was to make the finances better so that we can go back and redo and revitalize the entire campus. Another thing along that line was getting faculty salaries in a better place. And so as we get financially better, we were able to increase faculty salaries by an average of 20%. Long overdue. I believe that Howard faculty should be paid at the median, despite the fact that we don't have an endowment at the median of other universities. We don't have several other things at the median, but I think we should invest there. And I think it was an appropriate investment. And today's Thursday, so I think tomorrow morning in people's checks, they'll see that change. And, I'm happy as a product of Howard University and a beneficiary of the education from those very faculty who have toiled so hard to have seen that happen, during my tenure. I think it's an appropriate thing to do.
We're certainly appreciative of that from a faculty standpoint. Well, let's talk about, we have so many questions and we have about 15 minutes. So I'd like to try to get to a few of them, but let's start in terms of Howard and our rankings. This is one question that was received. President Frederick, for 15 years, Spelman College has been named the #1 HBCU. Considering Howard's considerable academic and financial resources, do you have a plan to return Howard to its rightful place among HBCUs. Thank you very much for taking time to chat with us.
Yeah, so rankings are a mixed bag, right? When they're good, we celebrate them. When they're bad, we criticize how they're done. And I think this is another example. Spelman is a college. Howard University obviously is a high research university. And so the criteria that they use in there, the two criteria that Spelman consistently outpaces us. Number one is if you look at the national universities ranking, obviously you won't see Spelman. We're the only HBCU in the top, I think 250 or something of that nature, and we're ranked at 83. So first things first, I think where we're ranked overall among national universities is extremely strong. Second is when you look at the criteria, there are two criteria in particular on the HBCU list that US News and World Report uses that I think you're referring to. One is alumni giving. Their alumni giving rate has consistently been, if not in the high 20s, the low 30s. When I took over the university, we were at 4.96%. But we have to remember their entire student population is about 2,250. We probably have triple the number of undergraduate women, and therefore, when you look at alum and then you do that calculation, we have much larger group of alum to mobilize, to give, to get in that range. Not to say that we shouldn't be doing it, but that means that we have to build infrastructure. When we started, we were raising $3 to $8 million a year. I believe last year we raised 165 million. And between July 1 and December 31st of this year, we've already raised $111 million. So we are definitely, I think, in the Department of Fundraising doing well, but they do use alumni giving rate of your undergrad alums as a criteria. And so it's a complicated criteria. It's one that we're expanding. We're up to about 13% right now. Our goal in our strategic plan is to get above 20%. I think for a large university of this size, with the alumni base approaching 80,000, I think it's a strong goal. Now, to be clear, what is the average alumni giving rate amongst all universities? It's about 8%. So we have finally gotten above the national average and are beginning to pull away. The second criteria they use is the graduation rate. And this is one that I try to engage alum around, because I think one of the things that we do is, as lots of people do, we romanticize things about the university. So whether we're romanticizing protesting, we romanticize, what the Mecca was. When I was here, before you, Dr. Thomas.
I think I got you by a couple of years.
Okay. The 4-year graduation rate was about 22%.
Yeah.
When I tell most alumni, they look at me like, you must be crazy. Right. But it's true. But people don't want to believe that. The 4-year graduation rate today is about 62%. So we've done a lot to move that. And when I started, like I said, it was 38%. Spelman's 4-year graduation rate is ahead of ours. I believe it's in the low 70s. So those two criteria are two criteria in particular that they continue to outpace us at, but we are closing ground on that. And so I'm not as concerned about being ranked above Spelman. I'm more concerned about us holding up to our standards. And I think our 4-year graduation rate should be 99%. I'll leave 1% off for those who may choose something different. And I think those who choose something different often go on and do very, very well, but they still benefit and they still praise the fact that the time they spent at Howard, led them to their success. But I think we need to set our bar as high as possible. And for the undergraduate graduation rate, I'm also concerned about that, because our alum tend to do a lot around service. And we focus, again, because the higher education industry focuses so much on the dollars and how much they give, they do not focus as much on the fact that a lot of our alum go back into the communities where they come from, and they work and serve those communities in ways that nobody wants to measure as alum giving back in terms of raising the specter of the university, even in terms of recruiting students for us, in terms of supporting students, mentoring. I think our alum probably do better than I'd put them up against any alum, but we have to figure out a way to measure that activity. And one of the things that we'll roll out later this year is an activity that is going to capture service of our alum as a measure.
Okay, we have so many questions, but one with regards to students, I'll kind of put these together. One question was, there is a big gap between female and male students.
Yeah.
What's being done to improve African American male enrollment, especially in undergrad? And the next one is in regards to incoming students. Howard receives millions in donations. Will incoming students in non-STEM majors and other majors with fewer scholarships gain more access?
Yeah, I'll start with the last one. And I know my development team isn't going to want me to get ahead of ahead of announcements we have. But I think we've been raising money across the board. I think the fact that question distinguishes between STEM might be misleading. I started a Grace Grant program where students who are Pell Grant eligible with an expected family contribution of 0, we fill their gap. We've done that consistently, and that gap has been filled well. We have raised significant dollars towards that program. We have an ambitious goal to try to raise about 100 million. I believe as of today, we're almost halfway there already. And that goes to students across the board, not just STEM students as well. Fine arts students that's got a scholarship around Netflix and from Netflix. And, again, there's several opportunities like that we've created in terms of funding. And that's something that we're going to continue to do. And just to be clear about how the donations work, if we get $10 million from a donor as an endowment, we invest it. We obviously want that interest rate to, compound, the interest guided to compound, but we then take out 4% on a rolling average of the prior 3 years in order to put back into whatever program they wanted that to go towards. So we don't get to spend all 10 million at once. That wouldn't be wise anyway. But it means that in perpetuity, those dollars will grow over time. And as they grow, we'll be able to actually offer more. So yes, some students will benefit now, not as much as we have a need for, but certainly long-term planning means that even more students will benefit in the long run. And if you could just remind me of your first question.
Yes, it was about the percentage of the gap rather between female and male students.
Correct. Yeah, so it's an ongoing gap. It's a national issue, especially among Black men and Black women. Significantly larger amounts are attending our universities across the board. And we see the same thing at Howard, where we have about 70% plus women in our undergrad campus to 30% or less in terms of Black men. And yes, we do have programs in place where we are actively attempting to recruit more Black men. But again, this is another place where I think we have to put data in context. Howard University enrolls more women than Spelman College and more men than Morehouse. So just to be clear about what we do. So while that percentage is an issue, every time we expand the number of Black males, we also expand the number of Black women as well. And I think the other thing that I think we need to be, to put in context is that as that is a part of our society, while that ratio was getting to that point, we only had one female dean in our 13 schools and colleges. We now have 14 schools and colleges, and 10 of those deans are African-American women. So, I think we have to look at it in a balanced fashion. We have to keep working at it. We want to recruit more Black men, but I want to be clear, we have to not adopt the position that we are recruiting them in lieu of the excellent Black women who are coming to the university.
Absolutely. Here, we just have a few minutes left, but I do want to make sure to get this question in. What is Howard's plan to remain relevant in its own community? How can Howard connect with and this is the questioner's words, carpetbaggers who are infringing on the campus and pretending that Howard doesn't exist? What organizational and community relationships exist to diminish the impact or create harmony?
Yeah, it's a great question. Our external affairs outfit has a major community relations component to it, and that's something that we have to continue to work. We have to also recognize that the economic forces around us are what they are, and we don't have control of all of the economic forces around us. So it does mean that we have to be very clear about who we are, why we're here. We have to educate the incoming population as well about that, so that they also have a clear perspective about what that looks like. And we have to continue to make sure that we're uplifting all aspects of, I would say, the community around us. So for instance, during the pandemic, us putting up free testing as the first institution to do that in Ward 7 and 8 is exactly what we should do. And that call to duty, offering vaccines throughout, offering to assist the city with testing during this Omicron surge. Some of the things that we do, I think, in health, we need to really uplift that. I think some of our research activity that we've seen in different aspects of the university that look at housing and the economics, I think we have to continue to push and publish that, but also to be at the state legislatures and at the federal legislative level, making that case as well.
So we probably just have time for one, maybe two more questions. And I'll ask you, where do you see Howard going as we're entering this new year? We've just been in 2022. We're hoping this pandemic may turn into an endemic. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but just in light of everything that's gone on, where do you see Howard, or what would you like to see the university doing this year?
Yeah, this year I think is a transformational year for the university. I think given the current financial fortitude that the university is experiencing, I think the university has to have plans in place to make sure that that's sustainable. I think we have to convert that into make sure it's benefiting as many as possible. So while we talk a lot about student financial aid, we have to also be thinking about faculty raises, which we're doing. We have to think about staff raises, which we're doing as well. But we have to also think of the sustainability of those efforts. We have to think of changing the infrastructure on the campus, right? As I said, we started with the residence halls, and now we've got to move into each of the academic buildings. Those things take time. To redo a campus that has not had deferred maintenance for decades does take time. Your school was moved out of a building that's pretty sick, but has been there for some time, was originally a hospital. That has to be completely replaced. We have to build a new facility that will house both the Chadwick Boseman College of Finance and the Cathy Hughes School of Communications. Those things take time. And so we have to have patience. So I think that transformation must occur. I think the other thing that must occur is that we have to look at the transition of the university just in general, in terms of generational leadership that has to turn over. I think we have to look at that. And my hope is that whenever that time comes, that we also will prepare the university for its first female president as well. I think that time has come. We've spoken a lot about the undergrad population. We now have deans that represent that population as well. And I think we have to have leadership that also represents that as well. And I'm not apprehensive about talking about that transition. I think that's what progress is about, passing the baton on.
That's what I was just going to follow up and ask that. Of course, I have to say that if you say the next president. So if the next president of Howard is a woman, then what are you thinking? What's next for you, Dr. Frederick?
Yeah, I'm not sure. My responsibility is to continue to steer this, steer alma mater in the right way. And my plan right now is that whenever that time comes, to return to my faculty position full time, to operate, be quiet, stay out of the university's business, write my checks to the university as I've been doing every year, and to continue to support what's taking place, to teach and operate. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to take my 17-year-old son and 15-year-old daughter to the operating room, and I think it still will represent probably the greatest day of my academic career ever, to see my son filled with that same rush. My daughter has been sold a long while ago since she wants to be an orthopedic surgeon, but to see my son just kind of get that same feeling I had when I first entered there, I think was absolutely unbelievable. So we'll see if I can do that and get the opportunity to pass that type of joy on to other students for a long time to come. I'd be happy to do that.
Well, I think that's a great way to end. I'll ask if you had any final thoughts or comments to add as we close out that I may not have asked, or something you just wanted to add.
The only thing I want to add is that, we're in a very difficult situation, I think, in the world in general. The pandemic has been a stressor. We've just come out of an administration running the country that has been difficult. I think everybody's fuse is short. Tempers are, I think, easily raised. And I just hope that we would all take our time to express empathy to one another as we go about our day to day. We've lost a lot of lives. And if not lost a lot of lives, lost a lot of quality of life. And I think that that also requires all of us to, take a deep breath and to make sure that we're upholding each other in the best way possible. And so I wish everyone a safe 2022. And I think for all that Alma Mater has given to all of us, we do have a responsibility to make sure that we continue to take care of her in the best way possible.
Well, I think that's the perfect way for us to end. I want to thank you, Dr. Frederick, for your time in speaking to all the alumni. Alumni get, as he had mentioned earlier, as he said, he will write his checks. We want you to pull out and write your checks and continue to donate so that we can make alma mater and the Mecca the best that it could be. But for now, I think that we have to end it there. I want to thank you again for this opportunity. I'm Jennifer Thomas. I'll say be blessed, not stressed, as I say to my students, and may the good news be yours. Take good care, and we will see you next time.